Watching NewsX World. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Europe must secure a peace deal for Ukraine with credible security guarantees. She adds these measures will turn the country into a steel porcupine and Europe will fully play its part. The British government has summoned Russia's ambassador after Delhi strikes in Kyiv killed at least 15 people and damaged the British Council building. Foreign Minister David Lammy condemned the attacks, which also hit the EU delegation, calling them an outrage against civilians. The Kremlin says Russia remains interested in negotiations and aims to achieve its goals through political and diplomatic means. The office further stated that Ukraine is also continuing strikes against Russian infrastructure, including civilian targets. Hundreds of UN staff have written to the UN rights chief, urging him to denounce what they call an unfolding genocide in Gaza. The letter warns that failure to act would undermine the credibility of the UN, citing comparisons to the perceived failings during Rwanda. All UN Security Council members except the US have urged Israel to act amid a famine crisis in Gaza, calling it a man-made crisis and demanding an immediate ceasefire. They've condemned starvation as a weapon of war and called for lifting restrictions on aid deliveries. North Korea's Kim Jong-un will be attending a military parade in Beijing next week alongside Russia's Vladimir Putin. This will be marking the North Korean leader's first multilateral meeting. China's defense ministry says Japan has continuously broken its commitment to pacifism, responding to reports of a US-Japan joint military exercise. Wednesday's deadly shooting at a Minneapolis church, which killed 2 students and wounded 17, is being investigated as domestic terrorism and an anti-Catholic hate crime, FBI Director Kash Patel said. The shooter has been identified as Robin Westman. Meanwhile, a top focus is Russia and Ukraine. At least 17 people, including 4 children, have now been reportedly killed in a Russian missile and drone strike on Kyiv that happened overnight. Rescue teams are searching a collapsed apartment block, with officials warning that more victims may still be trapped underneath the debris. Let's listen in to some of the local residents.
Люди потом прибегали уже после того, как прилетели, их всех трусило, колотило. Они плакали прямо, знаете, сами того они не ожидая, плакали и кричали. Мы тоже кричали там, когда вот это был прилет.
Взрыв, стекла летят, все сверкает. В первую очередь, конечно, побежал в комнату к дочке. Сначала шок, все, слышим как-то крики и людей. Уже сразу началось там. Потом вышли сюда, на улицу, все разрушено, все развалено.
Following the strike, the UK has summoned the Russian ambassador, with the British government stating that the attack, in addition to causing civilian casualties, has also damaged diplomatic buildings, including the British Council and the EU delegation in Kyiv. Meanwhile, another development, the Kremlin has now denied reports that Russian surveillance drones have been flying over US military supply routes in eastern Germany. The report published by the New York Times cites Western officials, but Russia has dismissed the claims as unverified. Joining me on the broadcast is Mr. John Rossomando. He is president of the Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst. He's joining us live from Washington. Mr. Rossomando, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World. I want to begin by asking you, as far as the episode between Russia and the UK, the surveillance drones, is concerned, this incident, Mr. Rossomando, regardless of the veracity of the claims, does feed into a deep-seated trust deficit between Moscow and Washington. How does a single event like this, or the mere accusation of it, risk a miscalculation, given that Russia and America are currently hoping to come to some sort of a conclusion as far as the peace talks are concerned?
Well, I think that in the short term, it's just another thing that happens in war. But I think in the long term, the bigger picture is President Trump working on a personal relationship with Vladimir Putin to try to bring this conflict to an end. I think that right now the Russians are trying to gain whatever advantages they have on the battlefield so that they can win in the long run.
Mr. Rosmando, I also want to understand from you then, does this particular episode need or call for a fundamental reevaluation of security postures on Europe's eastern flank as well?
Well, the Europeans need to increase their funding and their training and their equipment for their militaries regardless, because under the current status, so like I've said in this program before, NATO is just a bunch of flags. The French military is marginal. The Poles are the only country in Europe that have a really functioning, armed force. The British Army and Navy are marginal. So I think that the Europeans really need to step up and take care of their own defense.
And Mr. Rosamando, before we move on, I want to understand from your perspective, as far as the continuous strikes and counter-strikes between Russia and Ukraine are concerned, why do you think there is a hesitation for even a temporary ceasefire between the two nations?
Well, because there's a serious mistrust between the two nations. The Ukrainians don't want to give up any territory, and the Russians want to gain whatever they can before any sort of ceasefire. So I think that a lot of it comes down to the egotism of the two leaders. I mean, Vladimir Putin doesn't want to give up territory, nor does Zelensky want to give up territory and acknowledge reality.
Mr. Rosamando, stay on with us as we shift our focus to more news. The White House has fired CDC Director Susan Monterez less than a month after she was sworn in, amid sweeping shakeups under the Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. 4 senior officials have resigned, citing political interference, attacks on silence and science, and vaccine misinformation. Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has already scrapped the federal COVID vaccine recommendations for pregnant women and children, dissolved the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, and replaced it with hand-picked advisors. Monterez's lawyers deny that she resigned or was fired, saying that she was targeted for refusing to endorse unscientific directives. Resignation letters from top CDC doctors warn that Kennedy's policies are endangering Americans and undermining the agency's mission. The exodus follows budget cuts, staff layoffs, and even a shooting at the CDC headquarters. The turmoil leaves the nation's top health agency in a crisis at a critical time, as U.S. measles cases have hit a 30-year high and infectious disease outbreaks continue to spread. Back with us on the broadcast is Mr. John Rosamando. Mr. Rosamando, I have to begin by understanding from your perspective, this event seems to be a more significant test for the current administration. What does the firing of a Senate-confirmed CDC director just weeks into the role say about the president's approach to managing these key federal institutions?
Well, the thing is, the president wants people in key places who share his vision. The president, Senate confirmed or not, these appointees serve at the pleasure of the president. And the president clearly had no confidence in this particular director. The CDC has been in the hot seat since the COVID-19 pandemic due to pushing vaccine mandates, verified theories about the disease, and it has a lot to do to regain confidence.
And at the same time, Mr. Rossomando, how exactly is the American public reacting to some of these top officials resigning? Is it creating some sort of a sense of greater mistrust in federal agencies?
Well, I don't think Americans tend to pay too much attention to who's coming and going in federal agencies. They just live their lives, and what happens in Washington or down in Atlanta, stays there.
Absolutely. Mr. Rossomando, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX. Well, we leave it there. In other news, the United Nations has raised serious concerns over reports of enforced disappearances of starving Palestinians at 8 distribution sites in Gaza. UN rights experts have said that they are deeply alarmed by claims that individuals desperately seeking food from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have vanished with no clarity on their fate or whereabouts. But the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has denied these reports, stating that there's no evidence substantiating the said claims. On the other hand, hundreds of UN staff have written to the UN rights chief, urging him to denounce what they call an unfolding genocide in Gaza. The letter warns that failure to act would undermine the credibility of the UN, citing comparisons to perceived failings during Rwanda. Mr. Ahmed Fatou, spokesperson for the Fatah movement, joins us on the broadcast. Mr. Fatou, thank you so much for speaking to NewsX World. I have to begin by asking you, what's your take on some of these claims of forced disappearances, and how exactly does one tackle such a scenario?
That is another atrocity added to the long list of atrocities by the Israeli occupation and the GHF, suspicious position and criminal acts that have been doing on the past 3 months. The GHF has turned into a site of killing and death instead of being a site of distributing food and aid. Instead of being a site for safety, it's a site for abduction and terror. The world needs to look carefully about what's the atrocities and the crimes that Israel is doing relentlessly for the past 22 months. And now this abduction, including one child, is a shocking act that deserves the condemnation by UN experts, rightly so, to be condemned as a form of torture that is breaching the international humanitarian law. As regarding what should be done, it's what should have been done since the beginning of this occupation in 1948 until today, and that is to apply the international law. The rule of law must prevail and justice must take its place. When we find a state that is a member in the UN and is doing this grave violation against the people continuously, this impunity is a charade, must end it. At the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court must take action and not be obstructed by the United States. The UN Security Council must be allowed to take action, not to be obstructed by US veto. That is the crime of the century that's taking place as we speak right now, has been going on because of that unexplainable and unjustifiable impunity. Israel is an offensive state that is occupying other people's land, and now after 22 months of committing a genocide, as reported by the UN, by every humanitarian organization, and by every experts in genocide and Holocaust, that need immediate shutdown to these actions and to go immediately for ceasefire and to peaceful negotiations to get out and resolve all the issues, to get out the hostages and to get out the Palestinian hostages. As you just reported, 7 have been abducted. Also, there is thousands who have been abducted from Gaza without knowing where are they. And there are more than 3,000 administrative detainees in Israeli jails that are imprisoned without a charge or a trial. So we are dealing with a regime that's not only taking hostages of those Palestinian prisoners, it's taking 7 million human beings as a hostage by occupying their land, by their continuous incursions and invasions of our territories and threatening our livelihood every day in front of cameras without any remorse or shame.
Mr. Fatou, at the same time, how exactly can the situation be made better as far as the the claims of a famine in Gaza are concerned, what exactly can international agencies do at this point?
You know, GHF, supposedly a humanitarian institution, instead is a place for death and killing. So that GHF institution is complicit in this criminality, is complicit in genocide, and must be shut down immediately without any hesitation. Aid must come from the independent and respectable international organization, such as the UNRWA or the UN-related agencies, and to distribute food to the people fairly and effectively. As we have seen for the past 3 months, this institution is nothing but a failure. They fail in distribution, they fail in providing security, and they fail in even being conducting fairly with the Palestinian people. So we have 4 distribution points in the south by the GHF, guarded by mercenaries and Israeli soldiers. They demand from the Palestinians starving on the north or in the middle to walk a long distance, tens of kilometers, if not more, and to reach, you know, a little amount of aid. So that is not an aid for the needy or the vulnerable, that is the aid for the fittest. That is a crime that is beyond the crimes. And I am shocked that until today, this is defended by the United States, the very country that claims to be respecting democracy and the human rights and liberty, are funding the most cruel act that we have witnessed in history, where aid seekers and hungry people are being shot and killed in front of cameras, children abducted. Where are we in that in history if we are going to allow such criminality and such brutality and cruelty to take place? So immediately this should be shut down, and all support and all funds going to the GHF. By the way, there are European countries also complicit in that. There was a report by, or a testimony by one of the GHF founders. He said that we receive money from Western countries, all other than US. So that need to be shut down, and immediately to inaugurate a system that respects the human rights and respects the human dignity.
Absolutely. Mr. Fatu, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World with your perspective. We leave it there. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, has cranked up pressure on India to halt its purchases of Russian oil, repeating accusations that New Delhi is funding the Kremlin's campaign in Ukraine and casting the conflict as, quote-unquote, Modi's war. Speaking immediately after the Trump administration doubled tariffs on India to 50%, Navarro reiterated that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was funding the war machine. The 50% tariffs, the highest reciprocal levies in Asia, will hit more than 55% of goods that are shipped to the US, which is India's biggest export market. While key products such as electronics and pharmaceuticals are exempt for now, the duties will hit scores of labor-intensive industries like textiles and jewelry, as well as precious gems. Joining us on broadcast is Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, Senior Strategic and Defense Expert. Major General Kochar, I have to begin by asking you, how fair is it to squarely blame India's import of Russian oil as a cause for Russia's continued aggression against Ukraine, when data from last year itself shows that the EU continued to import significant percentages of Russian gas and fossil fuels?
Thank you, Devika. It's a very, very interesting discussion here because there is no logic in singling out India here. For the information of America, I think they are aware that China is the largest importer of crude oil from Russia, and India comes only after China. So Trump is not able to impose these kind of tariffs and sanctions on China because of the supply of the rare earth materials and other electronic and critical components from China. So it has singled out India as far as this is concerned. And one of the important reasons is that Trump has not been able to convince Putin or to pressurize Putin in any way to stop this conflict. There have been a number of meetings and we had the Alaska meeting also. Thereafter, Zelensky was also called to Washington. No amount of coercion is working on Putin. Trump is aware. And therefore, I feel that this is a desperate measure to ensure that pressure is put on India to stop importing oil from Russia. And I don't think it's going to work in this case because we are all aware that India follows a policy of strategic autonomy and has very strong linkages with Russia. Uh, the point now here is that after imposing these kind of tariffs and sanctions, where are we heading? Because right now, I don't think India is buckling down. And it will be very, very interesting to see in the SEO summit now, where Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi are going to meet, what kind of discussions are going to take place. Will there be a case now for India's realignment of its foreign policy? We should not forget that we have strong linkages with the United States, and this has happened over the last 2 decades. So, can just one president come and wipe out everything what the US and India have actually gone into? We have the COMCOSA, we have the LIBUA, we have so many agreements. Compact is there, ISET is there. There's so many agreements with the United States related to the energy sector, technology sector, and the defense sector. And most important is, it will be very interesting to watch here that whether these tariffs are going to be applied to the defense sector also, because basically it is our, we are importing from America, so I don't think those tariffs will come into play. But there is a tremendous pressure on Prime Minister Modi now, because as you rightly said, 55% of the items are going to get impacted, and mostly these are labor intensive, which are going to impact millions of jobs in India, and especially in states of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, because these are the two states where the textiles and the gems and jewelry are actually based here. So these are two critical sectors. India will has already started diversification, because that is the only strategy we have now.
Yes.
But impact is tremendous. See, this impact is not a small one. Almost 20% of India's exports are to the US today. If you look at the shipments, it is almost 20% of the shipments are to the USA, and
Yes.
the USA is our largest importer of goods. So I think it is going to impact a number of sectors, and our foreign policy has been put to a test.
Okay, Major General Rajan Kochar, on that note, when you say our foreign policy has been put to test, I want to understand from you, because India has shown no signs that it will be buckling under pressures from the United States of America, do statements like these, where the Russia-Ukraine war is being called Modi's war, is this somewhere a pressure tactic in order to create a narrative that will possibly push India to maybe use its position, its goodwill with Russia to perhaps take talks on a ceasefire and a peace deal forward? Because interestingly, of course, the US will never approach any country to join the peace talks. We know that very clearly. However, do you think that this could possibly be a pressure tactic to create some sort of a narrative that may push India to maybe use its good relations with Russia to intervene and say it's time to stop this war?
Devika, I think India has maintained a very consistent position as far as this war is concerned, because Prime Minister Modi has been talking frequently to Putin, and Prime Minister Modi has been telling him to stop this war. It is not the first time that this narrative has come up from the USA, because the USA has been harping on this for quite some time now. But India's stand has been very, very firm. When Prime Minister Modi visited Ukraine also and met Zelensky also, he offered his services to Zelensky that if you need a help, we will talk to Russia to end this war. And we have a wonderful opportunity coming our way now when Putin is actually going to visit India. And thereafter, I believe Zelensky has also accepted an invitation to come to India. So I think these are the two important things which are going to happen in the next couple of months, which would play up the role of India in world geopolitics as a peacemaker. Because India would also like this war to come to an end. It may be coincident that America is imposing that kind of a narrative on us with this 25% punitive tariffs of buying oil from Russia. But I don't think these kind of coercive diplomacy plays in a positive manner, because it's going to spoil the relation. And most important, Devika, is the trust factor. See, we have a number of defense deals going with the US, and supposing if we are buying a C-70 transport aircraft or a C-130 Globemaster or the Apaches or the Chinooks, these platforms are going to be with us for the next 40, 50 years. And the entire spare support of these platforms is going to be from the United States, because
Yes.
United States is not sharing any kind of technology with us, or joint ventures also not happening. So we have to see the larger perspective now, that when we are going in for defense deals with the United States, do we have trust in the United States to sustain this equipment with India for the next 4 decades? So I
Okay.
think that would be a very important perspective for our foreign policy and the defense policy makers in India.
All right, Major General Rajan Kochur, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World. In other news, China says that Japan has been continuously breaching the constraints of its pacifist constitution. In a press conference, the Chinese Defense Ministry spokesperson expressed that China opposes the joint trainings between the US and Japan. The spokesperson said that Japan should learn from its past and not stray onto the path of militarism. Listen in.
近年来，日方不断突破和平宪法约束和专守防卫承诺，在强军扩武的危险道路上越走越远，让世人愈发担忧其重走军国主义邪路。今年是中国人民抗日战争暨世界反法西斯战争胜利80周年。在这一特殊历史节点，日方更应深刻汲取历史教训，在军事安全领域谨言慎行。
This comes before the reported joint trainings between the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force and the US Marine Corps scheduled for next month. Joining me on the broadcast is Dr. Satoru Nagao, Fellow Hudson Institute. Dr. Nagao, from a geopolitical standpoint, what is the primary objective of these joint US-Japan military exercises? Is it to reassure allies or to deter Chinese aggression?
Of course, China's aggression. China's attitude changed the situation in this region. China is provoking the many countries around China, including Japan, including Philippines, Vietnam, of course, India. Even if India suffered 2020, the Galwan incident has happened. So China is changing the situation. So if China starts to blame Japan's move, we need to remember who is the reason. In the past, why Japan chose pacifism? Purpose of the pacifism is Japan will not become the threat again. That is the pacifism. But now threat is China. So attitude of the country around China has changed. Typical example is Taiwan and Philippines. Philippines dislike Japan's past. There are many information the Philippines blame Japan's past. But recently, what happened in the Philippines? Ministers, as a public statement, they said Japan should change Article 9 of the Constitution and change the pacifism attitude to the more normal and strong Japan. It's their wish, they said. So that's why country around China is afraid in the China's intimidation and ask Japan to be strong. So that's why Japan try to be normal. Try to be normal is not the meaning Japan is becoming the threat. This is just normal. We can fire the missile against China. That is normal. India has a missile, Philippines has a missile, Taiwan has a missile, South Korea has a missile. Japan also possesses missiles. That's all. This is not threat. This is just normal. China changed the situation, and Japan tried to react, and Japan tried to be normal. That's all. This is not threat. This is... but China need to emphasize because they need to legitimize their rapid military modernization, and they exaggerate Japan's threat again and again, especially this year, 18th anniversary of 18th anniversary after the World War II. So China want to say Japan is threat, Japan is dangerous, Japan is... Real fact is China is dangerous.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Nagao, thank you so much for joining us in NewsX World with that perspective. And this is all that we have time for. We will continue to bring you more updates.